2022-23 dividend tax calculation. 2 practical examples. Today we will take a look at 2 practical examples of how to complete a dividend tax calculation for income earned in the 2022-23 tax year. The tax you will pay on your dividend income depends on your other forms of income. So to calculate the dividend tax due, you also need to know your total income for the year from all sources. It's often easiest to illustrate this with real-life examples. Scenario 1. £9,906 salary, £45,000 dividends. Here we have a typical limited company contractor who earns a salary and pays themselves dividends. This arrangement of a low salary and high dividends is common for limited company contractors. Firstly, we will consider the personal allowance of £12,570. Let's deduct the salary of £9,096 off that, so we're left with £3,474, which can be used for dividends. Now let's run that through the dividend tax band calculation for taxing £45,000 in dividends. Firstly, the personal allowance can be used for £3,474 of untaxed dividends. Next, the basic rate tax band has £37,770 of dividends taxed at 8.75%. And finally, the higher rate tax band contains £3,826 of dividends taxed at 33.75%. So the total dividend tax due will be £4,415. Note that when using the basic rate tax band, we hid £2,000 of dividends from the 8.75% tax calculation to account for the dividend allowance. Scenario 2. £48,000 salary, £6,000 dividends. Here we have a typical pay employee who earns £48,000 per year, which is taxed normally through her payroll. But let's introduce £6,000 of dividend income into this scenario. This is an unusual example which highlights the complexity of a dividend tax calculation. It's to do with how her personal allowance is used. You can determine how you want your personal allowance to be utilized, and your personal tax return software will always calculate the lowest tax option for you. Let's go through the example. Let's use £10,300 of the personal allowance, and all of the basic rate tax band, £37,700, for the salary. Combined, these two figures account for the full annual salary of £48,000. Now let's see how the £6,000 dividend income is taxed. The personal allowance has £2,270 of untaxed dividends. Next, the basic rate tax band is ignored because it has been used up with salary. Finally, the higher rate tax band contains £3,730 of dividends taxed at 33.75%. So the total dividend tax due will be £583. Note that when using the higher rate tax band, we hid £2,000 of dividends from the 33.75% tax calculation to account for the dividend allowance. That's a low rate of tax for the dividends, and this is the complex part. Because we are now using some of the personal allowance for dividend income, tax due on the salary increases by £456. So the overall tax due will be £1,039. Summary. You can see from these 2 scenarios that the taxation of dividends isn't as straightforward as plugging a number into an online dividend tax calculator. Knowing your total income from the year from all sources should be your starting point. See our blog for all the details.